principle. So uh, what what is the meaning of covariation principle is, it basically states that for a factor to be considered as a cause of behavior, it must be present when the behavior occurs and not present when the behavior does not occur. So for example, if somebody behaved in a such a manner, so probably someone yelling at, in a group, like, in a company, in an organization, right? So it's a covariation principle states that the people who are there, like, myself, probably I'm the one who yelled at everyone. Probably I'm ascribing what are the causes for me to yell at them. So I don't see from their perspective. Probably I see that, I'm disappointed with my teamwork. So then I don't realize, like, they have a point. So it basically, covariation principle is ascribing the reasons for me to yell, the motivations for me to yell at my colleagues, and also the reasons why certain people, a particular individual behaved in a certain manner, like, without knowing their perspective. It's basically, as I said, it must present when the behavior occurs. That is what, the cause of the behavior, and not present when the behavior does not occur. So for example, later I don't ascribe my motives to my behavior once the event has happened. While I'm yelling at my, my own colleagues, probably I have my own motivations or causes to ascribe for my behavior. The similarly, we have something called discounting principle. It basically states that the role of a particular cause in producing a particular effect should be given less weight if other plausible causes are also present. It's a basically discounting. So for example, I am ascribing a particular, cause for my behavior, but there could be another reasons, another possible causes why I behaved in a such a manner, in a such an extent. Probably I should have a discount, like, probably I should give the less weight for my own ascribes, or the causes what I'm thinking about, because there could be other reasons, other plausible reasons, that are the reasons for it. And the third principle states that if someone performs an action when when there are known constraints and there are costs or risks. Say for example, uh, somebody is running a marathon on a cold and rainy day. Like, usually, when we have a 4K, marathon, or 4 km marathon and 6 km marathon and all, like, we don't, run when the, the raining heavily, or, it was too cold. But if you see someone, irrespective of the weather, irrespective of the condition, environmental condition, if someone is running daily, like, these conditions, so then his or her motive for doing must be greater than any of the inhibitory motives. What is inhibitory? Like, say for example, innate motives. So these are the, he assumed, these are the three principles would be there in the attribution theory. These are the some of the principles he has used to build his attribution theory. So if you see that, uh, the extension of this particular theory, we form impressions of others or anybody in part through observation of their behavior. So for example, probably we might observe thoroughly, their behavior, or we may observe just 5 seconds, or, just 5 minutes. Then we'll make, impressions. Say for example, many people says that, love as first sight. So when you say that, looking at someone, like, you have an impression. It's not that love at first sight. It's any kind of impressions that by looking at them, you have some kind of impressions, probably that is, very positive impressions about the individual, or very biased impressions about the individual. So we basically do this, have an impressions, just observing their behavior, whether it is a short term you are observing or a long term you are observing. So the basically attributions theory focuses the tendency for an individual to infer the causes of others people behavior. So other than Kelly's, another important researcher who has actually worked in this particular field is the Fritz Heider. So he states that we are naive amateur psychologists who attempt to discover causes and effect in events. Like, we are like, everybody acts as like a psychologist. Everybody wants to, prove a point that, I understood the concept why a particular individual does this. Because we have the tendency for individuals, tendency to just infer what are the causes for a others behavior, whether it is our spouse, our children, or family members, or our colleagues. Just knowing what was the actual reason, we just infer it. This is what basically is an attribution. So Haider further divided these causes into the two main categories. One is, he says that dispositional attribution, which is internal or personal, and also situational attributions, where you ascribe motivations or causes to external or circumstantial situations. So for example, he says that the distributional attribution is basically the ascription of one's own or another's actions to internal or psychological causes that are related to the features of the person whose behavior is being considered. So for example, when we are observing a particular individual, like why particular an individual commit a sexual abuse, or why certain individual is steal things, like probably when we are talking about a dispositional attributions, we ascribe the motivations or causes to that particular individual person's behavior. The features might be include, probably he might have that the belief systems of an individual, or attitudes of an individual, or what are the personality characteristics of an individual. So we ascribe, okay, he did it because this is what his personality, this is what his belief systems are. But what situational attribution says that the ascription of one's own or another's behavior to causes outside the person's concern, such as like, say for example, when we say that somebody succeeded in life, or someone got like civils, cracked the civil service examination, or got into JE examination, probably we say that okay, this person must be lucky. Or we say that he's not that talented, but still he got it, probably he would lucky. And he's something buying some things, he said that another person have money. Or if something done wrong, very wrong, say, probably we say that probably others might have pressured him to do that. So usually our tendency to ascribe the behavior not on the individual, but we ascribe the motivations or causes to the persons from the external factors. So this is how we ascribe or we see causes of any individual's behavior. All right, this is what dispositional attribution. Remember two things: it is basically personal or internal, whereas situational comes from the external circumstances or environmental causes, right? um, and while doing this ascriptions, we also tend to have some biases. Not every time we ascribe a particular behavior or we see causes why a particular individual behaves as that, we end up with having certain biases. So the researchers have identified there are several kinds of biases that occur in the attribution process. So basically, we have three important errors or biases. The one most important is, when inferring the causes of others' behavior, there is a general bias towards making it dispositional attributions rather than the situational attributions. Say, for example, if somebody misbehaved with a girl, or let us take that the famous case of Delhi rape, Nirbhaya incident. So probably if you have an attribution error, so the fundamental attribution error says that we make assumptions or we see causes making dispositional attributions, which is basically belief systems or the his own personality, rather than the situational attribution. So we might say that why they had involved in such a heinous crime, what made them to do, what made them to behave in a such a manner, like it is not just about a rape, it is completely the other level of atrocity, you know towards that particular individual. So basically we forget about the situational or environmental situations. Probably we ascribe and we give more importance to the dispositional attributions. This is what basically we call it as a fundamental attribution error. So the second biases, we call it as a halo effect. The halo effect is another good example of the tendency for bias in evaluating other people's behavior, or in ascribing why a particular individual does it. It is basically the tendency to allow general impression about a person to influence other more specific evaluations of the person. Say for example, all of us like one individual, right? One or the other individual, probably a person who is generally liked in our offices, in our or, working places, or in our families. Like what is the tendency is that a person who is generally liked by several people might be judged as more intelligent, very competent, and very honest than he or she is actually is. This is what halo effect. I hope everybody like internalize this idea of halo effect. We tend to do this mistake because we just like one individual for some reason. Like we put them more than us. Like we see them ahead of us. They are very good at everything. They are intelligent, they're honest, they're competent. This is what basically one of the biases when we evaluate others' behaviors. All right. The third one, belief in a just world. What is belief in a just world? Is basically it's a concept given by MJ Lerner. It's basically the tendency of individuals to believe in a just world. What is just world meaning? Good things would happen to good people and bad things would happen to bad people. That is why in India, I think not in India, the most of the times across, because I do teach forensic psychology. What I read and what I teach most of the times is whenever a sexual abuse happens to against a woman or a rape occurs in against women, we tend to blame the victim. Say, for example, there was an incident happened at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, uh, late night. The probably we ascribe that the behavior why that individual has to go alone during that time. It is not that we are blaming the perpetrator or the offender. We tend to blame the victim as if women has done something wrong, that just going out for at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, because that's the tendency. Because she is bad, why she has to go out at 10 o'clock? That is the reason it has happened. So that is the that is a kind of attribution error we have. Just good things happens to good people. If anything bad happens, because they are bad people, just like that it has happened. So it's a very prevalent in India. Most of the societies, we always blame the victims because we don't see that from the perpetrator as a actual offender, but we see that the victim has given an opportunity for offender to act such a way. So for example, when somebody asks why most of the rapes occurs, the current understanding, very controversial understanding is the comment many men or many societies makes that the clothes of a women, as if women clothes are revealing, so that's a tendency for men to commit these sexual crimes against women, right? These are the just few examples I could come up with, belief in a just world. uh, and also if you look at it, like what how attributions theory can be applicable in education, because we are just I thought of come up with this particular idea, and they were also mentioned in the textbook how attribution theory can be applicable in education. I hope most of you like have children, probably you could relate to these concepts while I'm going through these, how you can apply this attribution theory. So, for example, attributions theory can be applicable to understand the student motivation. So, how it helps that? See, it basically used to understand why students may or may not be motivated in their studies based on how they attribute their success. Like, failures to internal or external factors. We call it as internal locus of control or external locus of control, right? So, for example, if you ask the student, I'm assuming some of you might be teachers, like, some of you might be parents. So if you ask your child or your student why you failed, so the previous day I was not feeling well, previous day electricity was not, was not there, and I'm having a terrible headache, and this one. So the person tend to attribute, for his failure as an external factors, not his fault, as if he has to study before the previous night alone. Like, we just give assignments and everything, much ahead, like 15 days, 20 days. But the tendency for the students is to do at the previous day. If the something goes wrong with the previous day, they are unable to submit, on a stipulated day. So but they ascribe their behavior to the external causes. Like, so you, if you as a teacher, you understand that how they are using their reasoning, or ascribing their thoughts. So probably it would help us, any teachers, or the parents, to effective deal with our students or children. The second application, it also improves the student achievement. So if the teachers are aware of this attribution errors or attributions theory, teachers can use attribution theory to help students recognize their strengths and improve their weaknesses by attributing success and failure to specific skills and efforts. So for example, just one person failed in a particular subjects. If if teacher is aware of it, talk to them, provide a mentor, make them understand what he or she is having his strengths and weaknesses, rather than focusing on their strengths. If he mentor in such a way that you know they focus their weaknesses on, just work on that, then probably there would be success in the next time. So it is actually helps that we actually, s- teachers, as a teacher, will make our students to understand where to look into it. Not just say for example, because I couldn't get the good marks in the last exam, I don't assume, or like, I will be failing in the next examination. Yes, it has happened, but there is a chance for me to improve in the next examinations, right? If I focus where I lost my marks in the previous examinations, right? Nowadays everything is a continuous internal assessment, right? This is the one other applicability. And we also have another applicability, it also increases the student resilience. So by just teaching students to attribute their failures to controllable factors and to focus on the process of learning, teachers can help them to develop resilience or persistence in the face of the setbacks. So for example, in the first initial assignment, if somebody had come and told you that like, I failed because there is uncontrollable factors that affected, because my grandmother is not feeling well, or my grandfather is not doing well, or something, I missed the bus. So like, the people tend to, because the students is a child, they don't want to take blame on them, just put the blame on the others. Like, they see causes for their failure, someone else, not for them. So just rather than attributing their failures, if a teacher makes them to attribute their failures to controllable factors, probably internal, probably you are the one who has to walk, it's not the previous day. You have to prepare every day, like 1 hour, 2 hours. Even if something goes wrong in the previous day, probably you would be doing very good. So you make them understand that they should focus more on the controllable factors, what is there in their control, what is there in in their control, probably that helps people to learn, students to learn, or have a persistence in their success in their life. And also the addressing students misbehavior, right? This also can be applicable, like this can be used to understand why students engage in misbehavior, and to develop strategies to address the underlying causes, such as attributing misbehavior to lack of skills or a need for attention. So for example, why you have misbehaved with the girl, probably the boy has like a reason, or probably say for example, why you academic involve in academic dishonesty, like finding chitties in the examination, rather than preparing for the examination. If you ask that, it's a misbehavior as for in the academic perspective, the students has to come with the preparation and write the examination, not that they bring chits and be found in the examination by the examiner and send them out. So if you ask them focus that why students engage in misbehavior and develop strategies, probably they were not understood the concepts very well. As a teacher, make them understand and speak to them about the consequences of having chits in the examination, and all those things actually make students better understand the pros and cons of involving in the misbehavior. Then it helps the students to change their misbehaviors. All right. I just would like to take any questions further if I proceed, if you have quickly.
No, sir, thank you.
Right.
Sir, can you
Okay.
show us the second slide, please? Once the principles of attribution theory.
Sorry, ma'am.
Second slide, can you show us once? Attribution theory principles slide.
Yeah, principles, assumptions to make the theory. Yes, come.
Uh,
Discounting principle, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can you explain in a halo effect once?
Halo effect. So halo effect, what is the halo effect? I said it's a tendency to allow general impression about about a person to influence other, the more specific evaluations of others. Say for example, you someone you like someone, like because you like someone, because it's a general impression, you might be thinking about he's very good at everything, irrespective of he or she is good about it. Like you ascribe every possible positive aspect to that particular individual. That is what the halo effect.
So is it kind of assumption, like we assume something about someone, right?
It's attributions theory is basically that, right, ma'am? We ascribe things to their behavior. Like, so for example, because it may not be there in the persons, right? So for example, because you assume things about that particular individual, whether he or she is right, having those qualities or skills.
Sir, could you please explain situational attribution?
Situational attribution is like, ma'am, we give more importance when you ascribe to situations or environments, like any circumstantial things. Say for example, why you didn't attend the college on time, because there was an outside rain, or why you did the miss the examination, probably you ascribe that there is huge traffic on the road. But as a student, the expectation is that you have to come half an hour before, so you might have started little earlier.
Sir,
Like
in the example that you said about Nirbhaya's case, in that
yes,
case, what will be the situational attribution?
situational attribution is the the context of that particular society, environment, what actually made that particular individuals to behave in such a way. So for example, uh, it's not about the one particular individual. If you take that particular example, there are multiple people involved in it, even minors were involved in it. So for example, if it is of the group dynamics or the situations, probably not everyone has an intention to harm that particular girl. Probably one might have an intention to misbehave or abuse her sexually. But I told you, like group dynamics works the environment, because they might thought that nobody could recognize the victim, or because they were doing in the bus, probably they perceived it's more safer. They can actually remove all the any kind of uh, what to say,
Evidence.
evidences that they might think that they can eradicate it. So it's basically ascribing to situational situation. So because it's, if you are talking about why an individual may not be very aggressive when he or she is alone, but when you are in a group, because the group, the the environment influences to become more angry, or more the deviant. That is what the situational or circumstantial situations.
So, wouldn't the patriarchal values, the aspirational, the class differences, all this also be situational?
Ma'am?
The class differences, economic divide, patriarchal values, do all this also add to the
The
situational?
patriarchal values, that is a beliefs, no, ma'am, that comes from under the dispositional. Anything personal from my attitudes, like, my personality characteristics goes under the dispositional factors.
Sir, I would like to add an example here that
Yeah.
which happens every day or most of the common situation. Like if we break something, for an example, a glass container or something, we tend to put it on the situational. But if the other person breaks it, it becomes a dispositional. Now he is a butterfinger, or he was careless, or she is not really careful about anything. So that could be one example, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sir, so please can you quote all the slides once again
Sorry,
for
ma'am.
a few seconds, please?
Can you be louder?
Can we see the slides once again for a few seconds? Which slide, please?
Which slide, ma'am?
Just since the beginning because I didn't realize it was being shown.
Ma'am, you are not clearly audible.
Sir, can I just give you one example for halo effect with your permission?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Usually, it is a perception when it comes to the personality of deciding or concluding about a person. We choose any one trait and we ignore the other traits.
Yes,
And
not ignoring, sir. You
ignore,
have
I
a
think,
general
less
impression
important.
about me, right?
Yeah.
So, sir, for
The
example,
one trait is given more importance compared to the rest of the traits. It is
yes, yes,
considered as a
because you have a very positive general impression about me,
yeah,
you
and the
might tend to, see me very, high on every other
yeah.
traits.
Yeah, the other opposite of that is a horn effect. These two, I mean, things are used usually as part of errors in appraisals in organization.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, and there is a small error, sir, in the slide. In the first, you have said it is dispositional. In the second slide, it has come as distributional. I think that may be corrected. Thank you.
Okay, probably yeah, sir. It's a dispositional. Thank you, sir, for noting me down. It's a dispositional, not distributional. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It's an error. Right? Can I go ahead?
So, what is the difference between judging the people or situation and all this? Judging.
Sorry.
Are we judging these situations? Like as you told, we are judging the victim. We are blaming the victim, right? So, are
Yes.
we judging them or the situations we are judging them?
No, ma'am.
I I think she's talking about in just in world.
In a just world, ma'am.
Mm.
Yeah,
In a just
just
world.
a world, what happens, no, ma'am? The idea of the tendency that, we all believe that, right? One thing, whatever good things happen to, would happen to good people. So, for example, something bad happened to a particular girl because the tendency, the attribution error or bias is that because she's bad, who asked her to go out during the night? So, because she's a bad, that's the tendency. It is not about sometimes we ascribe that the character of an individual, we don't know anything about it, but still we ascribe who asked her to go, what is the purpose her to go out, like when you have that, because you believe that in a just belief in a just world, so your tendency to victim, blame the victim comes under this particular attribution error.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So I hope I can continue the second one. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Please.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Second
Please.
one is a cognitive dissonance theory. It's another important theory. Very important. It has several applications. It's basically given by the Leon's Festinger. Uh, he says that the cognitive dissonance theory is the conflict that you feel when when your attitudes are not in sync with your behaviors. So, for example, engaging in a behavior that conflicts with an attitude may result in changing one's attitude so that it is consistent with the behavior. So, for example, I come out with one example. Say, for example, Joe believes that cigarette causes cancer. Like, it's my belief. And also, but Joe also smokes cigarettes. So, what happens? The the more the more he internalizes the idea about that, cigarette causes cancer, the smoking cigarette causes cancer. So what happens, there is a dissonance because your belief is not sync with your behavior. So because your belief says that smoking cigarettes are injurious to health, but I'm engaging with that particular behavior. So there is a dissonance in within me, because either I have to change the attitude about the smoking cigarettes, or I might stop smoking the cigarettes. Unless I do one of them, I will have lot of dissonance in me, right? So there is a conflict within me that what is right and what is wrong. So because I do something, say for example, I must have been taught, or I must have said something to someone because it hurts the other one, but still I do every time. So there is always internal feeling that every time I do a mistake, I wouldn't have done, but anyhow I did it. So that creates a kind of internal conflict within us. So there is a dissonance. That is what the conflict that you feel when your attitudes are not in sync with your behavior. So this is what is happening with the Joe. So if the Joe has to reduce his dissonance, now if Joe believes that the cigarette causes cancer, it would be consistent him not to smoke because he is believing that. Therefore, these two elements are dissonant. What are the, one is smoking cigarettes are injurious to health, or the engaging in behavior. So the greater the dissonance, the greater the conflict, the greater the pressure to reduce the dissonance. So the dissonance can be reduced by changing the dissonance or the conflict elements, or by adding some consonant elements. How Joe can be done this? Probably, as I said, Joe can stop smoking, like say that because I believed that, he believed that smoking cigarettes are injurious to health. Or he can, because he couldn't stop smoking cigarettes, probably he can smoke low tat cigarettes. Probably he would assign that, okay, this is a low tat cigarettes, so probably it wouldn't happen. Nothing would go wrong. Or probably because he's not able to avoid smoking cigarettes, probably they avoid reports on the dangers of smoking. So no, don't bother about what is there on the cigarette packet. On the cigarette packet there is a big picture says that smoking cigarettes are injurious to health. Forget about it, don't look at that particular, because when you just avoid reports on dangers of smoking, or convince himself or herself that enjoyment was worth the risk. So any of these particular attitudes, the way you look at the things, probably that could reduce the dissonance conflict, so you can continue. Otherwise, if both the attitudes and the beliefs are very aggressive, like I do believe smoking cigarettes is not good for my health, but I couldn't stop. Every day I smoke for some 2 3 packets of cigarettes. So there is a huge conflict within me. I will not have any peace of mind in, I'm just giving an example. This can be applicable for any other aspects of it. Whenever your attitude or your belief systems are not in sync with uh, behavior. So for example, a kind of another relatable example, someone who is engaging in extra marital relationships, they know that if something goes wrong, if the other spouse would found, the life would be miserable, but still people would be doing it. So now you have to take a decision, because it is not good for my relationship with my spouse, probably I should stop seeing the other person. Or like what happens if something goes wrong, I have another, like I can be with him or other, her. So either way you have to come with your conclusion or an understanding, then only your conflict, your dissonance actually reduces. Otherwise people will have a will not have a peace of mind. There is a huge conflict within us, like it goes on happening, right? These are the two examples. And little extension of this theory, when we are talking about the cognitive dissonance, there are two types of dissonant situations or conflict situations might emerge. One is a pre-choice dissonance and the forced compliance dissonance. What is pre-choice dissonance is, it occurs in a situation where a person makes choice between several desirable alternatives. So, for example, there is a person called X. Say, for example, Joe is a person. Probably he is involved with two women at the same time, but he realized that managing at the same time, having a relationship with two people at the same time, it won't be good because he liked both of them. That is the reason he is engaging this behavior, having relationships simultaneously. So probably it's a pre-choice dissonance because he liked both the women, but he can't have a relationship with both of them because it would be a problematic, because if the other person comes to know that, he might lose both the women. So he decided to tell that other girl, like, I'm seeing X. So he tells why, like, I'm seeing, I've been seeing X, but I like you because I'm just not going to see the X. So probably he reduces the dissonance. So what happens when later he might feel very dissonance, because since he has liked both the women, that is what Leon Festinger says, that in the free choice dissonance, where both the choices we like, but some reason we have decided not to go with the other person, not to go with the other choice, later we might feel the dissonance. So in order to reduce the dissonance, you have to ascribe an attitude about the particular X or Y girl. Probably if you are going with Y leaving X, probably you should say that Y is more beautiful, Y is more wealthy, Y is more attractive, then looking, ascribing more positive qualities to the Y, you can actually, leaving X may not give you a dissonance or a conflict. Or negatively negatively you ascribe the X is too bad, there is always a conflict, fight. During making one of these, ascribing one of these ways, probably the person going along with the Y individual, the Joe, would be very happy because the he was able to reduce his dissonance, right? Which is what the pre-choice dissonance conflict, because the person has to make choices, one choice, between the several choices. What are the other dissonant situation, conflict situation might arise is forced compliance dissonance. So for example, it occurs when an individual is forced into behaving in a manner that is inconsistent with his or her beliefs or attitudes. So the force may come from either anticipated reward or anticipated punishment. Say for example, most of the times when our children ask us to, they wanted to do something or they wanted to go out, probably they don't like the other thing to do, probably you force them, okay, if you want to go out, clean all the, do the dishes, and make your room arranged properly. So that particular child may not like doing the dishes, or may not like clean his or her room. So but you are forcing a child to do it because there is an anticipated reward. So if I do this only, the probably the my parents would take me out, or my parents would give me reward, or probably if I don't do this, my parents will punish me, right? If I'm not doing very good in my academics or not able to finish my assignment, probably my teacher would scold me in front of everyone tomorrow in my class. So it's a forced compliance dissonance. So it occurs when an individual is forced because, but it is forced because the individual doesn't want to do the other thing, but he sees there is an opportunity, there is a reward. That's the reason I had to do this. So in those situations, he or she has to change the dissonance. Probably the reward is very good because after long time, probably my parents are taking me out, or it is more worthwhile to just doing the dishes. So but what happens while doing this, sometimes people may stop doing it, right? Usually it works very well, forced compliance, but sometimes every time we are forcing them, our children to do certain things, probably later they may stop doing those things. This is what, the two important dissonant situations that might arise. The third important theory, self perception, because I will take question and answer session little later, because it's already 9:50. Let me finish this and I'll give break. Right? The self perception theory, the basically it was given by Darrell Bem. Bem's basic idea is that when your attitudes about something are weak or ambiguous, you observe your own behavior and attitude, attribute an attitude to yourself. Say, for example, if you ask a woman, uh, if her husband likes a particular food or a brown bread, she might answer, I guess he does because he's always eating it. So it's basically when your attitudes about something are very weak because you do not know what your husband likes it, because you think that every day he or she is, your spouse is eating, like, every day dosa. Probably you might assume that he or she might be liking the dosa, but it's not, it may not be the correct one, because he or she has to go to the work and there is a little time you have to make very quick, the breakfast, probably brown bread. So he or may not like, the individual may not like the breakfast, but every time he or she is eating, but you ascribe. So for example, this women ascribe or thinks that because he is eating it regularly, he might like it. Like, in other words, based on the evidence of his behavior, his wife concludes that he likes brown bread. Suppose if you ask the husband if he likes the brown bread, according to Bam, the husband also thinks that himself, that he might say that I guess I do because I'm always eating it. So he also attribute, this is what the self perception theory. One of the crux of this theory is it is essentially that people infer what their attitudes are based on observations of their own behavior. Because we are engaging in a particular behavior, probably at the end of the day, probably we say that okay, this is what I like to do, because I look into myself. Probably every day I'm eating the same kind of breakfast. Probably I like those kind of a breakfast every day, right? So this is what basically the self perception theory. One important implication of self perception is that if you reward people for something they already like doing, they may stop liking it. Say, for example, every day your child, one of your child might be helping you every day, like, doing the dishes, or helping you in your day-to-day work. Probably one day you might think that this child is so helpful, let me give some money, like, let me give some pocket money, extra pocket money, because he she is doing dishes every day, or he is doing dishes every day. So the moment when you start giving, the rewards to that particular behavior, that individual may stop doing this, because he or she might perceive that earlier he or she is engaging in doing dishes is probably she likes doing it, but now since you are doing it, he or she ascribes that, so because I'm doing, my parents are giving extra money, you over justify that, and let me stop doing it because I don't want to be paid, I don't want to be rewarded, because this is what I'm going to do. So this effect has been called as the over justification effect. We perceive ourselves overly about the justification. Probably your parents might be very, understandable. Okay, like, let me give something extra because he or she is very helpful. But the person who is doing these things and, over justify this particular, behavior of their parents, and stop liking, stop doing that. This is what basically the self perception theory is all about it. All
I
right.
have a question, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Does this also imply that when I'm getting rewarded for something that I'm doing every day, I will stop because I want to be rewarded always? Does it also happen? Like if you don't give me money, I'll not do it anymore.
No, ma'am. This is a self perception. How you perceive that? Because this works for, because if you look at the theory of the self perception, like, it is basically talking about the how you ascribe, like, your own behavior. because you might be doing it because you like doing it, right? It is not that somebody, you do not expect any praises from others
Hmm.
because you wanted to do it. If that is the case, when somebody is giving reward, the things which you are doing on your own because which you like, you might see that, anyhow I'm going, being paid, which I don't want it, because I'm doing this because I liked it. So you over justify, the individual tend to over justify. That is how it works, that self perception about that rewards.
Sir, I have
So,
a question. This
Yes.
can Anshu here. This can happen in a positive way as well. Like suppose if I am doing dishes and my mother gives me extra pocket money, I may feel more positive, okay, and I will be more helpful, okay, to get
No,
more
it
reward.
is not. It is not over justification effect, ma'am. It is works in a different principle. It is not about the self perception. One application he has given, how this could be. You are right. It works positively,
Shweta, too much
but
disturbance from your
it couldn't
microphone.
call it as an over justification effect. Obviously, because every time you get reward, and yesterday also, in the previous class also we learned, because why we tend to, engage in more and more behaviors whenever we got, rewarded. So for example, I wear a particular dress, everybody, whenever I wear a particular dress, probably everybody is saying that you're looking so good in that particular dress. My tendency is that because I'm being praised, I tend to, wear more often that particular dress, because I tend to get praises from others people, right? So this works as a different principle, because I'm talking about this is a different thing. Always we walk, that is what the the social psychology is all about. It is the most, when you get being rewarded, because as an individual we want praises, we want recognition, we tend to, wherever we get the
Sridevi, mute your
recognition, we
mouth.
tend to be there, we tend to do those things. That's a different, and this is a different, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
So a
so
little more, if you could
Second,
explain, like, how over justification, how does that work? Like, how is it that the person who is getting rewarded for something they already know? What is the thought which makes them want to stop doing it? And just little more, if you could.
Because say for example, ma'am, the idea is I like doing something, right? I don't want to be praised, I don't want to be recognized for the work I'm doing it, right?
Right.
Right. So when you are getting this one, because I'm doing it for my own happiness, if my own happiness I'm being paid, it becomes a job, it
Got
doesn't
it.
become as a
Got it.
habit, right?
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, when you see that, I'm being paid because I'm doing it. So for example, if anybody doing service, right, so all of a sudden he become, he wanted to do the service of other people without knowing anyone, because it's satisfaction. One day he got, prize money or something like that. He might doing that because he don't want to be paid for that, because he don't want to see that as an obligation. That is how it's a over justification effect occurs.
I think like
Sir,
they feel it is a restriction on their free will. Somewhere they feel their free will
Yes,
is getting
yes, yes.
affected.
Because
yes,
you
yes.
over justify it.
Yeah,
sir,
yeah.
So,
In the
internet
presentation,
display also
when you
One
like,
by
place
one,
the
because multiple
yeah.
times, multiple, yeah.
Sir, I
Shweta
was
here.
saying that in some ways, like it is, people don't want recognition, right?
Yes, yes. They don't
That
want recognition for what they're doing it.
yeah, maybe if they are getting recognized, they feel like okay, they withdraw, right? They don't want
They
to do this.
withdraw from that situation. They don't want to be, identified as that particular individual.
yes,
And
yes.
So this is
the
basically the case. Can I continue? This is basically the case where you see homemakers, the mothers, when they did do things for family and they want to be valued in certain way. And say if you start paying them, say that you are doing so much for the family, so you take this 10,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees. This will create definite
No
discord
problem,
in the
because it's
family.
discouraged, because she is
Yeah,
doing, probably might be doing for the sake of the family, but it's not the extra pocket money, right? If she
absolutely.
over justifies it,
Yes.
like she might feel very hurt. See, I'm doing for my family, why you are giving me this money? So probably she might be doing, stop doing it.
got it.
Yes,
So there's this
yes,
internal
yes.
reward system which is more than taking care of
Yes,
the work that
yes,
they're doing.
yes, ma'am.
So in
Yes.
the slide, can you
Yes.
please show the slide with the first slide that says cognitive dissonance theory?
Cognitive dissonance. Just a second, I will stop sharing it.
Can
Right?
everyone
Yes.
just mute themselves, please? There is a lot of background
Yes,
disturbance.
yes. Please do, follow the
Yes, sir.
etiquette of, online
This
lecture.
one, I
Yeah.
see that in the book, Leon Festinger is mentioned, but it is under the title Understanding One's Own Behavior, Social Comparison. They are not calling it cognitive dissonance. So I'm just wondering if we need to write it down as or attribute
Ma'am,
cognitive
I think
dissonance
there
to
is
Leon
a,
Festinger.
being an academic counselor, I should not comment on those things. If you look at the question, look at the ground, I don't know why they had very less, topic
Yeah.
on that. And
Yes.
at the end of the question, if you see question and answer session, look at the questions, what they asked,
Huh.
right? They asked, I have seen yesterday, because the
Okay.
cognitive, that is not what, Leon's Festinger's what actually said. But the
Oh.
question, if you see that they were asking about the cognitive dissonance theory. So sorry,
Oh.
those things I may not comment, but this is what the cognitive dissonance theory and Leon's Festinger, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a question here.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, Neha, in this cognitive dissonance theory, you said the we have to resolve it, you know. So to resolve it, we can
No,
take the
ma'am.
positive as well as the negative route. You know, either you stop believing that it causes cancer, or you just continue smoking, and it can take
Change
any
your
of the
attitude
routes.
about the smoking.
Either you change your attitude or you continue smoking. Any, matlab, the
Yeah, both are
resolution
allowed.
of the dissonance can be
No,
positive
both
or
are
negative.
allowed, ma'am. Both are allowed. Say, for example, ma'am, I engage in smoking behavior, right? Earlier I used to have, the both the concepts, like smoking cigarettes is not good for my health, but at the same time I'm engaging, 2 3 cigarette packets per day. So if I'm believing both the things, I'm having this behavior, I'm also believing that, it becomes so problematic for me. I might not enjoy the smoking cigarettes, because there is always inner conflict. So in order to do that, what I can do, either I stop smoking and have a strong belief about the, it causes cancer, or because I might enjoy these smoking cigarettes, I just avoid the information about the smoking cigarettes injurious to health. So either the case, you will reduce your dissonance, because the greater the dissonance, the greater the, problem an individual might face.
Sir, can I just, with your permission,
Thank you,
give
sir.
another example which I heard from another psychologist?
Yes.
For example, someone is a member of PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, and he says that slaughter and killing is not allowed, but at home he is having sumptuous kebabs. So there will be dissonance that what he is fighting for outside and what he is doing inside. So he has two options, as one of the girl highlighted. Either he can choose to resign PETA and continue to eat kebab, or give up kebab and take the cause of
Yes,
the PETA stop.
absolutely, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So what happens if he continues with this dissonance, enjoying both the worlds?
Because it affects your mental health, right, ma'am? So for example, when your behavior is not syncing with your ideology, there is a greater inner conflict that reduces your mental health, that impacts, you would become more stressed out, you become more anxious, right? So
Right, sir.
somehow you have to manage your, inner conflict.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes,
So
right.
this will be absolutely true in the cases of, say, lifestyle diseases. People know
Yes,
that eating
yes, say for
sweets
example.
causes diabetes or weight gain or blood pressure, and yet people continue doing the same thing
It
till they
has,
reach a point where they need
enormous
medical
applications,
attention.
ma'am. Enormous
Yeah.
applications in the human behavior, right?
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
So, but
Uh,
resolving the dissonance the negative way will any which ways result in health issues, or let's say mental health issues.
but
Then
actually it
the
has only one aspect of it, ma'am. Say for example, if I am resolving it in a negative way, what is the negative way? Probably I start avoiding, right, reading about the how smoking cigarette injurious to health, what happens, I might be enjoying the life. I do not have, so probably that the smoke is injuring my health, physical health, but my mental health, I'm least bothered, right? I'm very good at what I'm doing it. So anyhow, resolving is negatively might affect other way. What happens if the conflict, if you are not resolving, right, that is the problematic for the mental health. It's in this particular example, if you are resolving it positively, both your mental health and the physical health will be saved.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
so. This conflict will cause more problem than a cigarette will cause,
yes,
right?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Very well explained. Thank you, sir.
I
We
mean, a
can,
cigarette will cause only physical health, but this
but
dishonest will cause, yeah, dissonance will
Bo-
cause mental health
more
as
more
well.
harm than the just cigarette does,
yes,
Correct,
yes.
correct.
right? So if you continue, or do you want just 5 10 minutes break? It's already 10:10.
So
So we
let's
can
have five
continue.
minutes break. Five
five
minutes.
We can
minutes
take 5 10
Yes.
minutes breaks.
Okay, fine. 5 minutes.
Mhm.
Take a
Yeah.
break.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So can you share your contact details here so that we can add you to the group if you have not
Yeah.
done it earlier?
Okay, ma'am. I'll share my WhatsApp number so you can do
Mhm.
that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
You're very kind, sir. Thank you.
Sir, do we get the recording of these sessions in case if you want to replay and learn from more from it?
Sir, please, sir has, yesterday sir has told no that RC Bangalore will take care of that, not sir. Again, why repeating the same thing? Thank you.
Mr. Gauri Kumar, can you turn off the camera, please?
It is a real distraction, Mr. Gauri Kumar. Please turn off your camera. It's a distraction.
I think he is watching movie.
I hope everyone is back.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So far, I finished 2 units. Third and fourth will be finishing it now next 45 minutes, hopefully.
Sir, you have given me confidence in psychology. I mean, I was very
Thank you.
afraid looking at books and so thick books. I didn't know how I'll understand. The terms, the words are very difficult to understand. But
Thank
I'm
you,
really
ma'am.
thankful to you. Thank you so much, sir.
So
Let
can
us
I request to
continue.
give, so can I request you at the end of the session to give a way to approach the subject, not only just learning and studying
Ma'am,
personality?
not today, probably next week. I have a trying to catch at 12:45 at the Majestic KSR
Sure.
Bangalore. I'm traveling, so that's why I'm little hurried today. So the next week, anyhow, I have to finish the entire subject this morning. Like second, third, and fourth module. I guess the next week I would be able to spend much time. Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure, sir. Sure.
So please excuse me today
No
for
problem,
learn.
sir.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my last question, sir. Can you give us some good books I can read about this than the IGNO material? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Sir, I
personal.
have given my number in that chat box. Write an email to me, right? Saying that you are from this. I'll share the books, textbook.
Fantastic,
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. Thank you. Uh, the third unit in this module, the methods of social psychology. I just would like to give a little, caution here. So whatever it is mentioned in the textbook, it is not like your material is not very vast. The methods of social psychology is a very huge, but whatever they have covered only 4 topics. That only I'm confined to with those 4 topics because it's enormous material when it comes to the research methodology. So you might be like, even when I was looking at the syllabus, I felt that, it's a half because that is how, we can't teach as a regular student, and those, IGNO cannot give as a regular student. So it is, is actually, it becomes another subject usually in the methods and, quantitative research methodology and all. I'm just going through, as whatever is mentioned in the textbook, right? So please do remember, like you might have read, other methods in somewhere, probably you might want me to ask, but please do confine with the material because that's, your question paper comes from that particular textbook, right? I hope it's visible. Methods of social psychology.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Uh, Under this methods of social psychology, we have several methods for data collection if we wanted to do the research. So, for example, so far we have discussed several theories. If you just wanted to, test whether that particular theory is correct or right. So, for example, you wanted to test whether cognitive dissonance works for a particular, aspects or a particular criteria or particular situation, probably you can test it. So in order to do any kind of research with regard to social behavior, like, or any other psychology, we have several methods for data collection. Especially, what is data collection? Data collection is a very systematic gathering of information for either research purpose or any other purposes. Like there is a systematic gathering of the information, then you use that particular information. Probably we have a number of data collection techniques such as observations, questionnaires, interviews, experiments, like, the quasi experiments, surveys, right? We have several types of, methods of data collection. So we'll go one by one, like whatever they have mentioned. One is they have mentioned observational method, correlational method, experimental method, and the quasi experimental method. So what do you do under the observational method? I have a little extended this observational method, uh, rather than other methods, because it's very important. Uh, what is actually observational method is the careful, very close examination of an object or a process or any other phenomena for the purpose of collecting data about it and or drawing conclusions. So in the observational method, the experimenter or the researcher passively observes the behavior of the participants without any attempt at intervention or manipulation of the behavior is being observed. Say, for example, I'm a teacher. Like, I just wanted to observe how my students are behaving, in the, ground, like, in the playground. Probably what I do as a teacher or a head of the institute, probably I they do not know whether I'm observing them or not. I passively observe their behavior, like, how each individual is observing. So in order to, like, take certain decisions, whether everybody, is there any bullying happening in the playground, is there any fighting, physical fighting is happening. So no, to observe anything, because I'm a class teacher, I just wanted to observe my students behavior. Here I am not manipulating any of the situations over there. I'm just a passive observer, and my students may not be able to know that I'm, they are being observed, right? So in the observational methods, in order to get the more output, more data or accurate data, it should be some trained individuals record the activities or events or processes as precisely and completely as possible without personal interpretation. So, like, sometimes what happens when we wanted to observe, if you don't have, clear guidelines what needs to be observed, like, I might say very random things. I might, note all the random points that may not be helpful for me to understand. Say, for example, if I'm wanted to understand whether there is any hierarchy in the playground, whether there any discrimination takes place, among the classmates, or any physical fight is happening, if these are my objectives, probably I would able to focus those things. And as a trained observer, I might get the more information, more accurate information, right? This is what basically as an observational method. Here the researcher is very passive observer. He may not manipulate any of the situations. And under the observation methods, we have several sub, observational method is a broader, and we have naturalistic observation, systematic observation, participant observation as part of this, in this method. So the natural, whatever the broad definition is applicable to the natural observation, because the naturalistic observation is sometimes called a field work or a field observation. That is what I told you, few seconds back. That is, overall observational method. So the data collection in a field setting, either in this case in the playground, without any laboratory controls or any manipulation of any of the variables. So these procedures are usually carried out by a trained observer who watches and records the everyday behavior of participants in their natural environment, because we need to observe, we need to understand how an individual naturally behaves if he or she thinks that they are not being observed. The moment they come to know that they are being observed, they might manipulate their own behavior, right? So for example, when you go to the classroom as a teacher, the moment they know that, the class teacher is coming, they might stop doing whatever they are doing it, like, using mobiles and, chatting with others, because, the moment you enter, they are, the very fight. Even we see, our children are doing this particular thing. When the moment when parent come home, the probably they behave very well. So they might be manipulating their behavior in this case, because that is not the naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation is in the natural environment, where a psychologist or a sports coach, or, observes their, sports team members behavior. So here I said that, example of naturalistic observation include the study that focus on employees in business organization, like members of a sports team or students and teachers in a school, or psychologist observation of playing children. These are the few examples. It's basically as a naturalistic observation. As I said, it's a very passive observation in their naturalistic environment. One of the advantages is that you it is being more reflective of the actual human behavior, because our participants are not aware that they are being observed. So probably it is more reflective for us to learn the actual behavior of our participants, whether could be our employees or could be our students. But what are the other disadvantages is that observations can be subject to researcher bias. Say for example, if I'm being biased, like, I just wanted to see certain things, whatever I want, I see things what I wanted to see, right? This is what observers may notice, only what they expect to see, not an objective way of looking at the things. And also in the naturalistic observation, the mere presence of a researcher in the natural environment can change the behavior of the participant. Say for example, though you are observing your students, outside the playground, but still they think that, they're being watched, they're, somewhere you are, the little far, but still they thinks that they're being observed. you know the participants can change their behavior in their environment. So these are the two disadvantages of the naturalistic environment observation. In order to avoid these disadvantages, we have something called systematic observations. So in the systematic observation is very objective, well ordered method for a close examination of some phenomena or an aspect of behavior, so to obtain reliable data unbiased by the observer's interpretation. Because in the naturalistic observation, I am having certain biases, so probably those biases might reflect in my observations. But in the systematic observation, I know what I'm being, what I'm going to observe, because there is a, probes for me to observe. So systematic observation typically involves the specification of the exact action. Say for example, if my management ask me to notice certain behaviors among my students, probably I look for those behaviors, probably my students are engaging those behaviors or not. I don't bother about any other behavior, because this is what the problematic in my institution or something. So what happens, there are exact actions to be, or attributes or other variables to be recorded and precisely, right? So the intent is here in the systematic observation is that under the same or similar circumstances, all observers will obtain the same results. If I am following a systematic observation, whether I am going to observe or you going to observe the same behavior, if the behavior is there in the, in the natural environment or in the environment, probably all of us, even five people go independently observe the behavior, still five people would be able to gather the information, same information, because we all have an objective or, well ordered method of, observation. Like, it is very different from the naturalistic observation. In the naturalistic observation, our observations could be biased. And third one, we have the participant observation, in which a trained investigator studies a pre-existing group by joining it as a member, while avoiding a noticeable role that would alter the group processes and biases. If you look at the ethnographic studies, I think in the textbook they have mentioned a ethnography. Ethnography is a kind of a participant observation, because in the ethnographic studies, mostly in the cross-cultural psychology, anthropology, ethnographic studies are more used, because you need to immerse yourself as a researcher, you need to immerse yourself in the group, and they forget about, about you as an outsider. You The entire group believes you as part of their group. So what happens, and it is a longer longer observations, because it takes a lot of time rather than the systematic observation and the naturalistic observation. It requires more time. You need to make sure that you be part of that particular group. And otherwise, if they see you, if they see you that, you are an outsider, probably they don't behave in such a way. All right. So in order to get the more information or an accurate information, you become the participant in that particular group. And but you are a researcher, but others are not aware that you are recording each and every aspect of their lifestyle. Especially the researcher's role may be known or unknown to the other members of the group. The mostly what happens sometimes, like we have very famous anthropologists like Margaret Mead and all, because this Margaret Mead has actually gone to the many of the African communities and recorded every of their behavior and day to day observations. She spent almost 10 to 20 years of her life dedicated to learn about their cultural practices. Some of the teams, they know that because she is a white woman, like obviously the particular tribal group might be knowing that. But though you are an outsider, and make the other group believe that you are part of their group, you are not there to harm them, or you are there to just to observe, right? This is what the participant observation. The mostly, as I said, cultural anthropologists become participant observers when they enter the life of a given culture to study its structure and the processes. So this is basically this is how an ethnographic studies can be done. The second method is a correlational method. So correlational method is a type of study in which relationships between two variables are simply observed without any control over the setting in which the relationship occur or any manipulation by the researcher. Say for example, if I wanted to, I just have an hypothetical example. If I wanted to see that the kind of breakfast my students have every day, or the day I conduct an examination, or their academic achievement, right? So probably I might, if I'm doing if I'm using a correlational method, I might ask my participants, my students, to complete the examination, like whatever the academic achievement. Then I ask the students to record what breakfast you had. The probably there are 70 students in my class. Probably they might say that several people had idli, other dosa, other pongal. Then I will see that based on these the type of breakfast they had and the marks they had. Then I try to the correlate, the try to see the association, whether having a particular kind of breakfast had actually made people to better perform. But the one big drawback is that we can only see that whether those two are associated or related, but we cannot make sure that the kind of breakfast has actually made people to you know do very well in the examination, right? We cannot establish a cause and effect relationship. We can only see the see the association. It may not have any relevance also. Say for example, uh, the statistics is very very good. Sometimes you just give any random two things, it might give one number, whether it is related or not related. But you need to use the common sense, like whether what if you found some kind of a correlation. Say for example, one very weird example we can give: what is the relationship between your intelligence and your shoe size? Like I just ask, I measure your intelligence, or your chappal size, your shoe size. Does it make any sense? Does it make any sense to say that okay, people who use the 7 size, the people are having more intelligence than the 10 size or 9 size? Because you cannot establish any cause and effect, because you can't manipulate the my foot or your foot size, right? So it is one of the drawback when you do the correlational research. Remember, correlation is not just a to see the relationship, not to emerge, not to identify a cause and effect to say that this is caused for that particular behavior. So in order to identify cause and effect relationship, we use something called an experimental method. What is an experimental method? An experimental method is a system of scientific investigation, usually based on a particular design, to be carried out under the controlled conditions, that is intended to test a hypothesis and establish a causal relationship, like a cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variables. So for example, let me go back to the my previous example, like, the relationship between breakfast type and your academic achievement. If I wanted to do that particular study as an experimental design, what I could do here, the breakfast type or the content of breakfast would become as an independent variable. Independent variable is nothing but the variable whose effect is being studied. My dependent variable would be uh, the academic achievement scores or the scores on a particular spelling test. So basically my idea is that having a particular breakfast content or a protein content actually make people to perform better in their spelling test performance. So this I can actually make a proper experimental design, because I will be able to manipulate my independent variable, because experimental method involves a kind of manipulation of my independent variable. So for example, how I could manipulate these variables, probably I instead of asking them to have my students breakfast at home, I might give my students breakfast every day, and those breakfast is randomly, like, my group of people randomly divided into two groups. One is high protein breakfast and the low protein breakfast. Say probably before the examination, I make my students to have a 500 grams of protein. I'm just a hypothetical example, I'm not a nutritionist, but say for example high protein breakfast, and others had given the low protein breakfast, say probably 100 grams of protein breakfast. Then I give the test and I see that whether having a high protein breakfast, who has the better scores, whether the low protein breakfast people had a high better scores than the low protein group. Say for example in this, I found that people who had a high protein breakfast had actually performed very well. Then I would say that probably my intervention has worked very well. Probably I might suggest that, okay, provide high protein breakfast to all the students. Say for example, if you look at the midday meal program by the central government and several state governments, because we see that the people are having, especially rural India, they do not have a proper protein or the high protein content. That is the reason government think that the providing midday meal as actually make people to come classes regularly, because there are many economical disparities in India. That is one of the reason why certain governments are doing this. So here I'm not talking about the government is providing a high protein breakfast. My idea is, if I wanted to do an experimental study to prove my point, yes, definitely high protein breakfast has an effect on the spelling test performance, that I can prove the point. So basically, earlier I said in experimental method, I spoke about a particular design. What is experimental design? Design is an outline, but whereas a method is a, like, what are the complete procedure. So here when I say that an experimental design is an outline or a plan of the procedures to be followed in scientific experimentation in order to reach a valid conclusions. Say for example, in this particular example, how do I choose participant selection? Because I need to take an average intelligence level or an equal level of intelligence in both the groups. I can't put high protein breakfast, high intelligent people, low protein breakfast, low intelligent people. Then if I say that high protein breakfast is actually very effective for you to get the good marks, then I made a mistake, because there is obviously an inbuilt or a predispositional difference between the two groups, because their intelligences are different. So in order to make a point that my intervention of breakfast content or the protein content has an effect, I have to use the baseline data of intelligence, make sure that in both the groups they're having an equal level of intelligence. So any difference that had up come, it's solely because of my intervention of breakfast content. So here the variable manipulation, the participant selection is random, and variable manipulation I controlled, have manipulated independent variable, which is a breakfast content, because two types of breakfast is there. And also the data collection is very systematic, like, and analysis I'll do, and also minimizes of an external influences. So for example, their intelligence level or the preparation time, these are all external influences that might give an alternative explanation. Say for example, someone who is having high intelligence, someone who is having a high protein breakfast, someone who prepared 2 3 hours, obviously they do very well, because so I need to control, so I need to make sure that except the breakfast protein content, everything should be similar between the control group and experimental group. The control group is the group which gets the high protein breakfast. The control group is the group which any no manipulation takes place. So as I said, in which subjects are randomly assigned to two groups, and you see that there is a influence of effect of breakfast content. And we also have something called quasi experimental design. The quasi experimental design is an experimental design in which the assignment of participants to an experimental group or control group cannot be made at random for some reasons. So for example, in this experimental design, you have to randomly assign your participants into both control group and experimental group, right? Randomization would be there. All the manipulation of independent variable is there, right? The time order is there, because you need to manipulate the breakfast content first and then observe the marks, not that first you give the test and then give the high protein breakfast, right? Like time order should be there. But what is difference between experimental design and quasi experimental design? All things are there except this randomization. For some reason you are not able to randomize people, randomly select people into two groups. So for example, there could be other reasons, especially when you do the survey, you may not be able to randomize unless you do an experimental study. And also, employees. So for example, I had choose a sample. I wanted to study the software engineers of the mental health. Probably I choose only the TCS company or a Wipro company, because it's my convenience to choose one company. Like employees who are chosen to work up a particular plant or a particular division or considered. So I cannot generalize these results to the rest of the software employees. And also the selection by administrator, as I said, as an administrator, when you go and collect the data from a school and you sought for permission, probably school administration said that okay, you go off to the ninth section A and collect the data, but you don't want to a specific class. Probably they may not allow you to collect the data randomly, right? So you may not get the proper demographic data set of this particular person, because this belongs to a particular section alone. So that actually limits the generalizability of the results. This is what basically the experimental design.
Sir,
And
sorry to disturb you. I'm just trying to understand. Practical reasons is clear. Ethical reasons, I'm just trying to understand what exactly that is.
what ethical reasons, ma'am?
You've written it cannot be assigned due to
Yeah,
practical or ethical
practical
reasons.
purpose or an ethical purpose. Say for example, uh, like a particular group is being harmed. So for example, if you see that
Yes, sir.
someone, so for example, you wanted to study the cognitive behavior therapy effect on reducing the depression, right? So for example, when you select the data, as I said, the baseline data should be equal. So you have selected certain individuals in the control group, certain individuals in the experimental group.
Yes.
So for example, you already know that these people are severely depressed in both the groups, but you are only being an experimental group and control group, you are only providing therapeutic sessions for only experimental group. You might be asking the other group, stay, wait list group for next 15 minutes. So it is unethical when you know that their condition is worsening and you ask them to wait for another 3 months to receive the, the treatment, right? It's an unethical. So for that reason, you may not be able to, randomize, as an experimental, proper experimental design.
Got it, sir. Got it, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I quickly finish this current trends. I have 2 3 slides, then I'll take questions. It's already 10:45. Please excuse me for today, right? The current trends in social psychology, what is mentioned in the your material is how different areas of psychology, like what are the topics from social psychology can, brought into different areas of psychology. For example, health psychology, the mostly the applications of social psychology in other fields. So health psychology, for example, someone who is studying about the health behaviors, maladaptive healthy behaviors and adaptive healthy behaviors, like, you wanted to see that how social support is very important for a particular individual's health. So the social support is a concept that is from comes from the social psychology. But still, in health psychology, in order to understand the healthy behaviors, you might be, using the concept of social support to understand whether whose health is good, whose health is better health. Probably people who have identified, who had, social support, or the support from the family members, or the people who do not have any social support, right? So you will be borrowing certain concepts into these different fields. And also environmental psychology, the application of social psychology can also be there in the environmental psychology. So for example, what are the perceptions, attitudes to understand the relationship between people and their physical environment? So for example, we say that, every time we are bothered about the environment, but we use all, instead of using environment friendly objects, we might use anti environment friendly objects. So you see that what is the perception and attitudes, the relationship between the people and their physical environment. So these perceptions and attitudes are the concepts that have come from social psychology in order to understand the certain aspects of the environmental behavior or pro environmental behavior. And also industrial and organizational psychology uses the group dynamics concept or a leadership management skills. And these are all, organizational skills, especially group dynamics, how group works, as a team, how team works as a group, and in order to have, better outcome for their, company or institute. So you are also discussing the group dynamic aspects from social psychology brought into the industrial and organizational psychology in order to better understand. And also forensic psychologists study the kind of, biases that, uh, gender biases, or the race biases, or caste biases, religion biases, or any biases, how that witnesses, how that affects the eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony is nothing but a good concept in forensic psychology, because when you observe, people, like, you when you have witnessed, or when you are there in, when something gone wrong in a particular mall, somebody stole something and ran away. So probably you may not have seen the particular individual while stealing that particular thing, but when they were running away, probably you haven't seen the person, but you are being called for any witness. But because when you are there and the rest of the group members were discussing about the features of the physical features of the individual, so you might have those features in your mind. When you are being asked, you might say that as if you have seen the person. Like, the biases about your own behaviors, biases might reflect in the eyewitness testimony. Like, you might, identify an unknown person, or the person who was not there in that particular occasion, as a victim, as a perpetrator. So these are the few concepts that we borrow from the, like, social psychology to understand the forensic psychology aspect. And the finally, cross cultural psychology, in order to understand the cultural differences, we, learn about the various behaviors and attitudes from across the cultures, and see that, look for the universal cross cultural differences, or, culture specific behaviors. These are the some of the applications the social psychology can be helpful to, in order to understand the uh, uh, other, human behavior. And ethical issues in social psychology research, there are four important points they have three or four important points they mention. One is the deception. So for example, deception is withholding of fact with the purpose of misleading others. So for example, as a researcher, I was studying something, but if I let them know what I'm studying, probably the social desirability is there. So, for example, I'm going to ask male participants or the male students, have you ever misbehaved with any girl, right? So for example, if that is my question and I'm letting them know that what I'm measuring it, so probably what they do, even though involve such behaviors, misbehaviors with the women in their life on the earlier days, probably the social desirability, because they don't want to put a bad light on themselves, they might say that they never ever misbehaved with any girl. So in order to get the proper data, you need to withhold the information, withhold the purpose of the research study for a while, at least until they finishes the study, because the later you need to give the information. So you are withholding information. What is the actual reason you are conducting the study? In order to get an accurate data, right? So the researchers might engage in the deception, and also the informed consent. We just can't go and ask people to just fill it off. We need to sort a voluntary agreement, or you can't force anybody to be a part of experimental subject for your experimental study, or participant for your any survey research. You need to get a voluntary agreement to participate in a procedure on the basis of his or her understanding. So you need to make them understand, at least if you are using deception, if you are not able to tell completely, if you are withholding a small information, but the remaining 20 or 80 75% of the information should be given prior, so they make an informed consent, they make their own personal judgment whether I can be part of this study or not. So that is what basically informed consent is. The finally debriefing, because when you use the deception, because you think that withholding information is very much vital for you to collect the data, immediate after the study you need to debrief the person. So for example, the debriefing is nothing but the process of giving participants in a completed research project a fuller explanation of the study in which they participated than was possible before the during the research. So for example, in this example about the misbehavior with women, because I wanted to get an accurate information, I did not inform them prior, but immediate after the study, once they finished the study, I had to tell them, debrief them, why I have used this, why I have withhold the information. And after debriefing them, if anybody would like to withdraw their responses, you have to allow them to withdraw their information, because that is the the participants rights, that anytime during the study they can withdraw from the study. So this is what basically debriefing. You have to minimize the risk. So for example, sometimes as a researcher you might be thinking that uh, having deception is very much important, but you need to minimize the risk, taking care of other aspects of controlling any kind of major risk towards our participants. With this I have finished the module 1. I have 7 minutes. Quickly, if you have any doubts, I'll quickly answer.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, this developments, historical developments in social psychology, if you could just go over that in brief, please.
Ma'am, now?
Just in brief, sir, because I don't know, the small table has been given, but here, like, it's all
Yeah,
over
I
the.
told you, no, ma'am. I have given, I told you already, because I have, used a different material, because I found that, the material was not the full. I just thought of giving more information. If you want me to cover the same thing, probably I will, look into that, what table they had given, and give an explanation, right? Continue with
Okay, sir.
before the next class starts, right?
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Right? Any questions?
It was very useful, so thank you so much.
Right?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Shweta here.
Yes,
This
ma'am.
experimental method and correlational method, what I
Yeah.
have understood, you please tell me if I've understood correctly or not. The experimental method is where we go with a controlled environment study intended to test a hypothesis and stuff like that. So
Testing
are we?
hypothesis.
So should we understand that this
Testing
hypothesis,
hypothesis.
this
Yes,
hypothesis,
sir.
this hypothesis
Sir,
that
one second,
can I
ma'am.
continue?
One second, 1 second. Sorry. Sorry.
No, it's okay, sir.
You're asking
So
me something,
this
ma'am.
hypothesis that we are talking about, or this
Yeah.
underlying study, the subject of the study, would that come from correlational method? We talked about this protein thing, and we go in a class and we say that we observe that what kind of food children are eating, and we say that what kind of marks they are getting, and then we go to the next level and we say that we feed them protein and non-protein food, and then we do this experiment, and
No,
then we
ma'am.
arrive at the
The difference between correlational method and this one. So, for example, you might have, as I told you, you might ask the students what kind of breakfast they had, and you ask nutritionist, two idli, how many proteins are there? Dosa, how many proteins are there? Then they see that you go with the either the type of breakfast they had or the amount of protein they had in different breakfasts and just correlate with it. So here your objective is not to find the cause and effect here. The objective is to see whether these two are correlated. So if you look at the hypothesis differences here, in the correlational method, the hypothesis would be there would be no correlation. So, for example, there are different types of hypothesis, null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis. So, for example, if you are going with the alternative hypothesis, you might say that there would be a significant correlation between the breakfast type and the breakfast type and the academic achievement, the spelling test performance. But when it comes to the experimental design, you have the hypothesis differently. You assume that because you are manipulating your independent variable, high protein and low protein breakfast, you assume that the people who had a high protein breakfast would perform very better in the spelling test than the people who did not have a protein breakfast. So basically you are seeing the differences between the people who are part of the high protein breakfast and the low protein breakfast,
Okay, okay, got it, sir.
right?
Yeah, got it.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sir, could you please provide your mail ID in the chat box? It will be really useful.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, ma'am. I've given. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If there is no further classes, see you in the next week with the
Thanks,
next morning.
we'll look forward to your next session.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, sir. It was an amazing session. It was an amazing
Thank you,
session.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your use.